It's my right.
It's my right.
It's my right.
It's my right.
Women have made great strides in the fight for equality, but from unequal pay to gender biases, women are still struggling for their rights.
Since the 1960s, women have been speaking out to society to recognize them not just as housewives, but as capable human beings.
A movement called women's liberation began at the dawn of the 1960s. Women began adopting methods of rhetoric from those used first in the battle for civil rights for African Americans, and then against the Vietnam War.
A topic currently in the hot seat, especially with women's rights activists, is the topic of abortion. Today, there are many women activists who passionately stand up for their right to choose abortion.
However, there are also those who are strongly opposed.
I passed their handheld signs, I went through their picket lines. They gathered when they saw me coming, they shouted when they saw me cross. I said, why don't you go home? Just leave me alone, I'm just another woman lost.
Yet after it all, women have always advocated for the right to choose.
But when it seemed as if there was nowhere to turn, a light emerged and became the new face of women's support.
Jane, a safe haven, a friendly face, an empathetic best friend.
Jane was the name of the underground abortion service in Chicago that began with one woman, Heather Booth.
Jane was a group of women. It started very, very small as one woman in college who she'd been involved in the civil rights movement. Everybody knew she was very politically engaged. And somebody asked her if she could help them find an abortion for a friend. And she called around. She didn't, in fact, have any idea, but she called around and helped to connect this young woman up with an abortionist, and then she became kind of known as the person to go to.
The group Jane became known as Chicago's Underground Abortion Clinic. Jane began hiring secretaries to take phone calls and set up appointments.
We would describe exactly what was going to happen, what the woman could expect, what the woman could expect in follow-up, and then we would call them back in a day or two and give them an address to go to. And we would work out of two apartments, one which we called the front and one which was the place. And we borrowed apartments.
These apartments were right in Chicago's Hyde Park. Jane would secretly operate in these apartment buildings. Although Booth had several abortionists on site, she realized that she too was able to perform them.
One of the principal people that we were using, the abortionist, was not a doctor. He had simply learned how to do it. Somebody had trained him how to do it, and she thought, he can do it, I could do it. And she had developed a really good relationship with him, and she got him to train her. And then she trained someone else, and pretty soon we stopped using any of the other abortionists. We just started doing them ourselves. We actually described what happened medically, and that was radical. That was really unusual. Medicine then was these guys, and they were almost always guys, who told you what to do. The abortion issue was most urgent because it was like the front line. Women were literally dying because this was illegal. Hospitals would turn women who were bleeding away because they were afraid of the legal consequences of helping a woman who was miscarrying, because then they might be said to have assisted an abortion. So women would literally die, would not be able to get help.
At that time, 15,000 women a year were dying of unsafe abortions, according to the Chicago Women's Liberation Union.
The sister of a woman who was coming through that day was very angry about it. She was very Catholic, Polish Catholic woman. And she called the police. They took us all down to the station. They interviewed us, and we spent the night in Cook County Jail.
Charges against the members of Jane were put on hold until the Supreme Court decision of Roe v. Wade.
Equal pay, equal work.
Women gathered to show their support for the Supreme Court's decision to legalize abortion. Not long afterwards, word broke out of the news.
I think that to raise the dignity of woman and give her freedom of choice in this area is an extraordinary event. And I think that January 22nd, 1973 would be an historic day.
Good evening. In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court today legalized abortions. The majority in cases from Texas and Georgia said that the decision to end a pregnancy during the first 3 months belongs to the woman and her doctor, not the government. Thus, the anti-abortion laws of 46 states were rendered unconstitutional.
While many women celebrated, pro-life supporters were extremely maddened by the Supreme Court decision. Even today, as abortion is still an issue, pro-life supporters voice their opinion in the streets of Chicago.
I think that most Americans recognize that this is a profoundly difficult issue for the women and families who make these decisions. They don't make them casually. And I trust women to make these decisions.
Everything you need as a president, somebody will stick up for individual rights and not be pushed around.
I believe in life from conception, and I do not agree with abortion under any circumstance.
Like Roe v. Wade, where I believe are best held on a state level and addressed there.
I agree with Senator Thompson, which is we should overturn Roe v. Wade and return these issues to the states. I would welcome a circumstance where there was such a consensus in this country that we said we don't want to have abortion in this country at all, period. That'd be wonderful. I'd be delighted.
Would you sign that bill?
Let me say it. I'd be delighted to sign that bill.
I don't really understand why people want to control other people's lives. I don't understand why you would think that such a personal decision, such an important decision, would be better made by anybody but the people involved.
Wherever women are suffering,
I am there.
Wherever women are struggling,
I am there. Wherever women are fighting for their liberation,
I am there.